Hey, thanks for checking out this week's video. So if you're new to my channel, I'm the artist LittleSqueesh, and here I post art time lapses, supply hauls and supply reviews and all that kind of good stuff. This week I am going over a graphite commission that I did with gold watercolour embellishments, and rather than speeding it up this week, I thought I would actually do some real-time clips so you can see the technique. Now I know I am not the best graphite artist in the world, I do still have a lot to learn, but I often get asked questions on how I do my graphite portraits and tips and tricks, so I thought I would just share everything. You can see me doing everything in this video, and I'll talk through things a little bit, and if you have any other questions that I don't cover in this video, put it in the comments below and I'll definitely get back to you. Okay, so what I didn't cover in this video is that I did this sketch using reference from my client. Basically the brief that I was given was that she wanted a portrait of herself and her daughters depicted as elves, which is really cool. I was so happy to work on this commission. She didn't want it to be an exact likeness, so it did mean I could play around a bit and make the features a bit more cartoonish and things like that, so that was really fun. I actually sketched everything up on Photoshop and got the sketches approved by my client. Then I transferred them to an A3 sheet of paper. So after I've transferred it to the paper, I go over the top with a kneaded eraser and I just lighten the lines a bit, because otherwise you'll have all these lines showing underneath where you probably want some smooth gradients. You will see me use the kneaded eraser. I can't remember at what point, but I do remember keeping it in somewhere, so keep an eye out for that. It's essentially just me dabbing it over the top of the lines, and it doesn't completely erase, it just softens. So I've still got guides, but it shouldn't affect my layering or anything like that. And then once I've prepped the line work so it's not too dark, I always start with this little brush, and it is just a cheap little synthetic brush that I got from the equivalent of like a pound shop. It was in a set. I think it was Home Bargains. To anyone who is in the UK and has access to Home Bargains, it was like a big set and it works perfectly. This is my favorite one. I always find the key to using this little brush is to always keep graphite on it. You can see that the brush fibers are black, so even when I have no lines, I can make marks straight from the beginning. What I tend to do is I've got one of those sanding blocks, and I'll just get a regular pencil, like a HB or more, and rub it on the side of the sanding block, and then I can just brush it over the top of what's been left on there, and that way it loads up the brush again with more graphite for you to go back in. Alternatively though, if you don't have a sanding block, and what I do still do is you can just scribble on a piece of paper, preferably with like a darker pencil, so like a 2B, 4B, something like that, and then just brush over the top and that will load it up itself. Now there is a knack to using the brush. If you sort of like scrub back and forth on the same kind of imaginary line, if you will, one side will be a sharper line and then the other side will be a soft gradient. It will transition out to nothing. So you'll often see when I'm using it, sometimes I'm holding it like the regular way you'd hold a pencil or a brush, and then other times I do like a really awkward flip upside down. That's because I want a different side to be soft or a different side to be sharp, depending on the angle. Normally it would be 10 times easier just to flip the artwork around, but for the sake of videoing, I always try to keep the artwork still so that if I do speed it up, I'm not making you guys feel sick. So if you're thinking of trying the brush as a method for your graphite, try get it loaded full of graphite first and just scribble back and forth on a piece of paper. You'll quickly get to grasp with what I mean. If you're holding the brush the regular way and not upside down or anything like that, the sharpest bit will be the top, right where the bristles start, and then it will fade out as it comes towards you, if that makes sense. Then obviously if you do it upside down, it flips the other way. I find that the brush tool is the most powerful tool alongside tissues for my graphite. There are some other things that help too, like you'll see me using a cotton bud, or is it, you call them Q-tips in America, but I mostly stick with the brush and tissues. So my general process is, like I say, I start with the brush and I do the shading usually like around the eyes, the nose, the mouth, like really basic, really light. And one thing when you do use tools like brush and tissues, you're essentially just smudging things. So if you have line work under there that you want to preserve or that you want to show at the end, then you're going to have to keep going back over. One key thing about graphite I found is that if you press too hard in the beginning, you get that horrible graphite shine. And once you get the graphite shine, there is no going back. There is no overcoming this graphite shine. People say once you've used the fixative, that can help. And yeah, I'll be honest, I've had nasty graphite shine in the past and nothing really fixes it. You just best going really soft and building up your layers. You'll see a lot that I'm using a brush and then I'll smudge it all out and soften it with tissues, and then I'll have to redraw in my lines because they've got all blurry, and then I'll have to put in the highlights, and then I'll do everything again. Because the thing is about building up your layers, especially when you're using tissue paper, it flattens everything. It does get darker, but it will flatten things if you go too crazy with it, which is why I use tissue paper on areas where I want a really soft transition. So the cheeks, I always use tissue paper on cheeks. Sometimes on the nose, it depends how large a scale I'm drawing at. If you need to get in a smaller area but you want the same kind of effect that a tissue will do at blending, that's where I will use a cotton bud. You'll see me use the cotton bud on the nose. That's really effective. So yeah, basically just go really slowly. Put in some subtle shadows here and there, and when you're happy with them, try to get them darker if they need to be darker. Don't forget to keep putting your highlights in, because once you do all your smudging, the highlights get darker and you can forget where they are, or the shape will change. And just be patient and keep going. Now you'll see here with the hair, I change over to PanPastels. Now, if you've never used PanPastels before, they are amazing. They're not particularly cheap. However, if you're just buying like for graphite purposes, then black and maybe a couple of greys if you really wanted to. But I only ever use the black, and that does me just fine. But this is great for filling in those larger areas that need to be darker. You can see how quickly I'm getting in those darker tones with the PanPastel. To have done that with graphite pencils would have taken ages, and probably would have increased the risk I was going to get lots of that graphite shine on it. So yeah, I love PanPastel. It can be a bit messy and the tools don't last that well, which is a shame, but one great thing about it is that it is erasable. So that is my preferred method for doing hair and other large areas that need to be darker. A quick note, you can also use regular brushes with the PanPastel. I do this on the girl's hair in a moment, just in case you don't like the tools that come with it. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the two children as well. I haven't actually finished the mother of the portrait at this point, but I tend to block in as much as possible, and then I move on and block in all the other areas so that I can see the piece as a whole, and then I go back and put in the final details, because otherwise I feel like I end up over rendering one area and then I need to over render everything else to get it to look like it's a part of the same portrait, if that makes sense. So to stop me from going too crazy, adding too much detail, I try and do it this way. Again, it is the same method for both these girls. If I haven't softened the lines with the kneaded eraser, it's because I didn't feel I needed to, or perhaps I've already done it. And then I go in with a brush. I might use the tissue paper and then the brush again, pencils, yada yada, just slowly building it up. I really hope that this video is really showing like the process better than I'm explaining it, because I don't feel like I'm doing a great job at explaining it. Now, one thing I haven't really spoken too much about are the erasers that I use. Obviously the kneaded eraser comes into play quite a bit, but also my go-to eraser is that mono, or can I say eraser more? It is called a mono eraser though, and I went over these in my latest art supply haul, so I'll put a link up in one of the pop-up cards or something if you're interested in checking them out, because I got a couple of things. I also got a battery operated one, which I do use in this, but I don't think it made the cut into the video because it wasn't that interesting. It was mostly just cleaning up edges. You know how graphite can get everywhere, or maybe you just want a really crisp line that you know you want to be extremely white, then the battery operated one is great for that. Or perhaps when you make mistakes, I find that it's good because it gets more of the graphite off the paper than a typical eraser can. But the mono one is definitely my favourite because it is so small and easy to use. It's great for adding in highlights or reflected bounce light, you know, that really subtle edge, usually down like the side of the jaw. Yeah, it's definitely my go-to. Now I think this is a nice clip that's happening just in the video to give you a better idea of how nice PanPastel can be to use. I think it's great for hair. You can just sweep it and you get the motion of the hair. It's so easy to build up to get it darker, and as you can see, it is erasable. Yeah, definitely recommend it if you haven't tried using it and you do a lot of graphite portraits. Again, I'm still very new to this particular product and graphite portraits in general. I know there are lots of people that do it better. There is some amazing artwork out there. Go on Pinterest and have a look and get inspired. I'm hoping you can take some good tips away from this video as a starting point, I guess. Now at this point in the video, like I say, I've gone back and I'm doing those sort of final touches or thereabouts. Adding more details, a bit more contrast to the three people in this portrait. I've already blocked in the flowers by this point, but I wanted to keep, for the sake of the video, I wanted to keep everything together, and so I'm showing me doing the flowers after, just in case you realize, hang on, it looks like she's filled in some flowers at the bottom and she hasn't shown it. It is coming, don't worry. It's the exact same approach I take with portraits in that I go in with the brush, I do all the basic shading first. It doesn't have to be accurate either, it can be super rough and basic. You can see what a mess it looks. I do all of the leaves, all of the flowers, just with the basic soft shading from the brush. So it looks a mess, it looks awful alone. But this is just the first pass, and then I'll go back in and refine it some more with a pencil. I'll darken up the edges, sharpen the edges, add additional shading, erasing in highlights and things like that. Also be mindful when you want to darken your edges, don't just press harder, choose a different pencil. Hopefully you have got a set that's like, you know, HB, 2B, 3B, 4B, yada yada yada. But use them. That will help reduce that graphite shine. I do find the higher number B you go up, it can get a bit more grainy, so if you don't like that. I think the highest grade I'm using is I think it's a 2B in one of my mechanical pencils. For the really dark areas, I'm actually using, I've featured these in videos before, the Mars Lumograph black pencils by Staedtler. They're great, they don't have much of a shine, if any at all, but I find they don't smudge as well as just your regular graphite pencils. But that's what I'm using for the really dark bits. Okay, so layering these flowers, like I've said throughout the whole video, it is the same sort of process over and over again, hoping it's not getting too boring, but giving you good enough examples to sort of see what I mean. Now I've got all the soft shading in, I can do the darker lines, and I am using reference for these. I took some photographs of flowers ages ago, and that's the reference I'm using, although there's plenty of reference online. But it gives me an idea of where to put the shading for the leaves, or more so for the petals. The leaves, I'll be honest, I kind of just make them up, which is super fun. And once I've filled in all of these, I take a tissue and I sort of smudge it all out to create a gradient underneath, and then I take that mono eraser pen and I sort of put a white outline around everything to really make it pop. You see the brush tool here really helps to create that soft shadowed edge of the leaf, and then because I've used the brush, it's sort of smudged things where I didn't want it, so I come back in with the mono eraser and put in that reflected light. Like I keep going on, I feel like a broken record, I just keep going on and on about the same thing. I just want to show how these tools can be used for various different ways in hope that it helps you apply it to your own art, because I know when I watch other people's tutorials they show it really well, and perhaps they do a demonstration of flowers, for example. I find that then I can draw that exact same flower the way that they've done it, probably not as good, but you know, but then I still don't know how to apply it to my own work and how to use it where I would use it. So fingers crossed this gives you a good idea of how you could adapt any techniques that I use in this video to what kind of art that you create. Or perhaps you guys use it a different way, and that's cool too. Let me know in the comments below if you do something similar or if you do something incredibly different, and in what circumstances you find that those work better, because I am all up for tips and tricks and trying new things, especially with graphite. I love graphite. And now on to the most nerve-wracking part. My client had discussed that she wanted it embellished with the gold watercolour. She'd seen me do it in some of my other pieces. So when I was creating the sketches, we had already agreed on these particular markings on the elves, her family of elves. So they were all going to be this solid gold, and then also a couple of hints in the flowers. And I had to try not to go too crazy with that. But this was the most nerve-wracking part because it's paint. I'd already done everything else, and if I'd messed this up, it would have been awful to come back from, but thankfully I didn't. By the way, I had mentioned in another video where I'm using the Arteza supplies that I hadn't properly tried out these miniature brushes. I've had a good use of them now, and oh my goodness, they are amazing for these teeny tiny details. You can see just how small these markings are, and I don't think I have any other brush in my sort of collection that would have been good for this. So there's a follow-up to that video real quick. And that's about it. And as always, I love hearing about your experiences, your tips, your tricks. So if you want to share anything, then please do in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give me a like, and if you want to see more, then please do hit that subscribe button. And as always, all the materials that I use in this video and things that I have discussed will be linked in the description box below, so do check that out. Until next time, bye!